What's up, everybody? Finally getting back in the shop today, doing some work on the Sears. Last time I took this thing for a drive, I realized shortly after going that the battery actually wasn't being charged. And these things typically don't produce a whole lot of amperage on their own anyways. So I decided that since it did stop working, it was time for a little upgrade. So here is our proposed upgrade. This is a alternator. Obviously it's a more like a vehicular style alternator. V-belt driven, weighs about 5 to 6 pounds. As you can see by the size of my hand, it's a little bigger than a softball. This was advertised as a one-wire hookup. It does have a couple other wires, I assume for warning lights. I picked this up on Amazon for $68 shipped to my house, so the price was fairly reasonable as well. So it says on the paperwork here, which you probably can't read, that it produces 14.5 volts at right around 6,000 RPM, and let's see what the amps were. Current output at 6,000 RPM was 61 amps. So the way I'm going to mount this is actually, I found this mounting bracket. I forget, this is probably like a mowing deck mounting bracket, maybe it went to steering, I'm not really sure, but I found it in my scrap steel pile right over there. And it's pretty much unmodified, but I did drill and tap a hole into the end of the shaft. I realized that it's not perfectly centered. I tried to get it centered, but I failed. Not a big deal though. It's just a retainer bolt. I got a couple washers on there that I put on. It's going to be used in conjunction with this 1/4 inch bolt that I got here, a couple washers, and this nut is actually going to work as a spacer to take up any extra little space that is not taken up by the mounting side of this alternator. Over here, I've got a 4.5 inch pulley because, like I said, this thing produces X amount of amps at 6,000 RPM. This alternator actually doesn't start producing power until 1,500 RPMs. So it has to spin at least that fast for it to actually produce any electricity at all. So we got a 4.5 inch pulley I bought from Tractor Supply here. We're actually just going to bolt it on with this other engine drive pulley. So they're just going to be double stacked and bolted on. This is a 6 inch drive pulley for the transaxle. And I'm planning on mounting the alternator in front. So now that you have a basic understanding as to what it is that I'm trying to do here, I will note that I'm actually not the first one that's ever done this modification. There are a couple YouTubers that actually have done this on their own. I've looked them up. You can search for yourselves. The most notable is probably Doc Sprocket. I'll link his video below. He recently did it on one of his mule tractors, but he's had pretty good success with it. I think he used a 10 SI alternator on his tractor, but he had to actually mount it reversed because they are directional, whereas this alternator is bi-directional because it's internal fans. And I don't know if you can tell, but the front fans go one direction and the rear fans go the other. So no matter which way you spin this alternator, it will still cool itself off. So the first thing I'm going to want to do here is actually pull this assembly off the existing drive pulley on the engine here. For that I've got a electric impact wrench, which I love these things. You can pick them up, they're cordless, you can get them corded. Highly recommend them. You don't have to run an air compressor for them. As far as for taking stuff like that apart, it takes a second. Really nothing better than not having to mess with blocking your flywheel to loosen a crank bolt. One thing I'd like to mention before I put pulleys on, or wheels for that matter, basically anything that touches metal on metal, I always like to use a lot of anti-seize. Some people like the copper, some people like the silver. They both have their place, but I always lube the shaft with a lot of anti-seize because if you're driving through mud and water like I do on a regular basis, things like to rust. So I'm a big advocate of using anti-seize. I mean, even on the inside threads where your bolt's going in, some people like to use Loctite because they're afraid they're going to come out. I've never had that problem. Now we got the keyway in place. I'm going to put a little bit more anti-seize just on the inside of this pulley hub, just for the sake of having it in there. I like going overboard with this stuff. Makes disassembly a lot easier if you ever need to do so. So here's the alternator again, and this is that mounting bracket I showed you earlier, and you kind of see how the whole thing goes together. The two washers on the back side, the shaft goes through the bottom pivot point of the alternator, and I've got the 1/4 inch bolt threaded through into the shaft. But the idea here is we're going to mount this bad boy kind of up front here. Oops. In the same mount that the hood all mounts to, because I had to raise the hood up, if you remember from some of my earlier videos, just to accommodate the winch. So I'm going to actually have to weld this sucker into place. The most important thing you can do before doing any of that is making sure you've got your belt alignment absolutely perfect between your output pulley and your input pulley, because otherwise it'll burn the belt up prematurely. Alright, making progress. So as you can see, I've got a little tack weld down there. I've got a little tester belt here. This is obviously not going to work because it's way too long, so I'm going to have to buy a belt for this specific little alternator application. But you can see from up here that our alignment's actually pretty good. I'm very happy with it. I made sure to get the alternator straight as well as in line with the belt. I'm going to finish welding this mounting bracket in, and then we're going to figure out this top mount. So I finally got the alternator pivot mount welded into place. Welded on this side, the bottom of the side, and the front underneath, and I actually even welded the back from the other side. I did remove the alternator when I did this. I tacked it into place initially with the alternator in place, so I knew that everything was still lined up between the two pulleys, but then pulled the alternator and finish welded it. But now I focused my attention on figuring out how I'm going to basically mount some sort of slot that I can adjust the adjustment with. Alright, so I had to pull my winch wires out of the way temporarily to get this thing welded into place, but I got it welded into place. Seems very solid. The whole tractor moves when I try to move it. Doesn't seem like it'd be that solid, but it is. I'm going to go find myself a belt right now, and when I come back, hopefully we can finish this whole thing up. Alright, so I got my belt, and I actually added a little bit of steel to this whole situation. I added a support right here to kind of help the adjustment slot, I guess you'd call it, not bend one way or the other under the belt tension, because I felt like there was a lot of leverage there because the thing was very tall. And I also cut this a little short, the slot, and welded in with, say, it's actually a Woodruff key. I definitely should have paid attention to the location of this, because it makes it a little tricky to get the alternator in and out. It's not super bad, but I didn't think about it initially when installing this piece. You can still get the alternator in and out, obviously, and it just takes a little bit of pivoting and moving things around, but you can get it in there. It's kind of a tight space. I'll show you what I mean. You just got to kind of wind it in here a little bit. Set the post, and you got to rotate it down, slide it back, and then slide it back again. And there we go. Not too bad. And for the new belt, I think this one ended up being 28 inches. So let's see how she was on there. Perfect. Still got probably an inch to an inch and a half of adjustability with the belt. So to tighten this thing up, I'm just going to put a little lateral pressure on this till the belt is tight. And then snug this bolt up. Pretty good. Got my wire hooked up, and I ran it kind of in line with my throttle cables here, zip tied on. And over here I've got a couple alligator clips hooked up to the battery, running down to the leads of my voltmeter, my multimeter. And as you can see, I'm pulling 12.6 volts. That is off just the battery at this point. So let's see, ignition on. I'm going to hit the glow plug. That'll probably drop the voltage a little bit. Get the glare out of there. Yep. So we're pulling about 0.6 volts off the glow plug. A little bit more as the battery runs down. So once that alternator is running, hopefully that number will be up around 14 volts. We'll see. We'll see how low the RPM can be before it actually kicks in. But with the pulley ratio, even at an idle, I should still be allowed to charge. And for those of you wondering as to whether or not I'm going to lose all kinds of horsepower running an alternator, I think it's going to be in the 1 to 2 horsepower range at the most, and that's when this alternator is charging full amperage. Now that's probably only going to be a problem when I'm running the winch, or the battery's really, really dead, which is only going to be occasionally. Otherwise, the alternator is just going to kind of spin freely and just trickle charge what it needs to every little bit. So shouldn't be too big of a problem. Alright, we're sitting at about 12.4 volts right now. Let's see what we get. See if we can hear the alternator bogging the engine a little bit. There you go. It's definitely charging the battery. She's up around 13.1 volts. I think 15 volts is probably a little high. I think they're all supposed to top out around 14.8, but I'm not going to complain. It's obviously it's working. I'm not too worried about overcharging. I think it can handle, 0.3 volts being over. Well, we'll find out. Either the battery's going to freaking have a meltdown or the alternator's just going to shit the bed, but either way, it's all a learning experience for all of us, isn't it? Yeah, she's creeping back down to 12.8, and you could definitely hear the engine bog a little bit when I hit the glow plug button. That glow plug's drawing a lot of amperage. So I think as far as future goes, I'll probably build a shield to keep this thing from getting completely soaked, but it's in a good spot. That part of the engine never really gets that wet or muddy. The only real concern I'd have is the water coming up off the belt, but it's still got the belt shield, so we'll see how it holds up. I might have to build another shield in front of the alternator to keep it from getting completely soaked. Now, if I was going to do this conversion to a vertical shaft motor, like most of you have, if you guys have already done the pull start modification that I've showed you in the previous video, where you put a V-belt pulley and bolt it down to the top of your engine, as long as you get this thing really centered really well, which isn't that hard to do, just take your time, you could mount that alternator off to the side here or on the other side, really anywhere you could physically stick it, and then just run a belt from your pull start, your emergency pull start, to the alternator. And since that alternator is bi-directional, it's really not going to matter which way it spins, but that would be just as easy as doing it on the horizontal shaft engine. So it is possible to do on a vertical shaft engine, and probably worth it in the long run if you're running winches, lights, and other accessories. But other than that, I'm going to say this is pretty successful. I'm pretty excited that I've actually got a really good charging system now. Again, only other person that I know of for sure that's done this is Doc Sprocket. I'll link his video below so you can check his setup out. It's very similar to this, just a different alternator. I can use my winch as much as I want. I can charge my own battery. I'll probably get a small set of jumper cables so I can jump other rigs on the out in the field. I'll probably add some other accessories like maybe a tire pump and stuff like that, so I have the ability to air down or air up if there's a flat tire situation out there. I'm going to kind of transform this bad boy. Not transform it, but kind of change it into like an overland style vehicle, so I can basically be self-sufficient on the trail, have everything I need, depending on the situations I encounter. So stay tuned for that kind of stuff. I'll be doing small little things here and there to kind of try to make this thing more useful in the field. Not that it isn't already, but every little bit's a little bit better, so it'll be kind of neat to see what we can do with this thing and how far I can really go with it. One wire hookup, definitely a great alternator. I'll post a link to the place where I bought the alternator down below, but it was like $68 shipped to my house. Plus the pulley was like another $25, and then the belt was another $20. So I mean, you're looking at a little over $100 to do this conversion. So there you go. That's the video for today. Project done. Got a couple things to finish up, maybe some shields and a guard for that front belt so nobody loses their finger in there. But hopefully you found this helpful and informational in some way, and if you did, be sure to drop me a like below. It only takes a second. It helps me out a lot. And as always, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I always like reading your comments, so I might not be able to respond to every single one of you, but I do enjoy reading them, and I respond to most of you that have questions about things. But either way, that's going to do it for me today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.